And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Pure Adrenaline Fantasy Sports. It's John and Shawn with you as always. Once again, we are joined by Jeremy from NFL Chaos with Jeremy. Guys, how are we doing this afternoon and Jeremy this morning?
Pretty good.
Okay, good. Settled in. Back home.
Good, that's good. Guys, we're going to go over our top 20 fantasy running backs from this season. Make sure if you have a comment on our rankings, leave a comment, ask any questions, and we will start the countdown right after this. So, before we jump into the top 20 running backs, guys, anybody that stood out to you this fantasy season in the running back position?
Do you consider Deebo Samuel a running back?
No, I do not. That's why he's not on this list. But and Patterson as well. They from the NFL website, they are both listed as wide receivers. So that's the group I have them in as well.
See, I thought Patterson, though, would be before the season qualified himself as a running back over receiver.
For fantasy, but I'm just going by where the NFL has them listed.
Gotcha.
Yeah, kind of like baseball where a guy plays multiple positions. You can switch them around, but their MLB position only shows one. So let's jump into the top 20 here. And like last week, I do have this PDF file available for download. The link's down in the description. So, guys, check that out. I do have the three guys on there, Eckler, Jonathan Taylor, and Najee Harris. I'm sure we know who ended up number one. But let's start diving into the top 20 here. Some of these guys we won't have to look too much into. But this one, Williams from Kansas City, we had him projected 58th overall heading into the year, finished 20th. Shawn, thoughts on the season from Williams?
Yeah, I mean, he got more playing opportunity than he normally would for the fact that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think, was injured for like 8 to 9 games this year with his injuries. But due to him having a chance of playing more games, obviously his rankings and his stats are going to be a lot better than normal. So that definitely helped his season overall. But other than that, from a fantasy aspect, no one really had him other than probably one of those players you picked up and you kind of rolled with him occasionally through the year and then kind of probably released him towards the end of the year again because you didn't really know what kind of stats he was going to get with Kansas City not being a big running back team.
Yeah. Jeremy, any thoughts on Williams with the Chiefs?
Yeah, depending on what kind of league you're in, he's a pick him up, drop him type of guy. Think the only person, the only owner that would want to try to hold on to him and have him around is someone that has Clyde Edwards, to have the backup ready. But in most leagues, you don't have the roster spots, especially when the bye weeks start hitting, to do that. So, he looks like the kind of guy that would be released and picked up and kind of like one of those journeyman rentals.
Yeah, agreed. So let's keep going with our list here. Devin Singletary from the Buffalo Bills. We had him projected at 45, finished 19th. I know the last 4 or 5 weeks of the year, he really became their go-to back. Shawn, any thoughts on Singletary?
I'm actually shocked by this one for the fact that, like you said, up until probably like week 10, 11, he was kind of irrelevant. They didn't really have a running back game going, and then they started using him out of the backfield. I would say probably 25, 30 of his receptions and probably almost all of his touchdowns came after week 10 this year. He kind of turned it up a lot later in the year and became more alive at the end of the year.
Yeah. Jeremy, thoughts on Singletary?
Yeah, look, it looks like he helped anybody who, for whatever reason, needed a running back and picked him up later in the season. Boy, did they score with that, right? Mm-hmm. Just when he came into it and started making things happen. So that there are probably some happy people because there's so many different fantasy leagues and people. That somebody had an injury or something and picked this guy up, and then got rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
We got to see what Buffalo does this offseason. I don't know if he's a guy you could look to into next season. You just have to watch Buffalo carefully and see what they do in the draft and free agency.
Yeah, agreed 100%. Number 18 was Montgomery from the Chicago Bears. We had him projected 17th overall, so just about where we had him projected. Stats a little lower from the projections, but overall, what do you guys think about Montgomery there in Chicago? And top 20 in fantasy. So even if you're in a 10-team league, he's definitely worth having on your team.
Yeah, he's not a bad running back. The only problem is with Chicago, they didn't really know what kind of offense they had until midseason. And then once Justin Fields started playing and he was more mobile, Montgomery's carries kind of went down. I know he was banged up throughout the year. He missed a few games. The only thing I'm concerned with is they did draft a running back last year at a draft. And then they also have Tariq Cohen, who I'm not sure if he's on the team or if he's a free agent this year. But if he's back, does that affect Montgomery's numbers with Fields running quarterback and then having multiple running backs that they could swap in and out? Other than that, he had a good year. He didn't really score a lot of touchdowns like you would think he would. You would think that with him being a decent-sized back, he would be able to get a few more rushing touchdowns. With only 7, that's kind of what hurt his stats this year.
Yeah,
Jeremy, thoughts on Montgomery in Chicago?
Yeah, if I'm in my normal top 10 10-team league, this is not a guy I want as day one, week one, filling him in as a starter. I see him, possibly drafted in the very late rounds, guy that you have on the bench for bye weeks, things like that. And then if things turn around for him, there's an injury, there's no one ahead of him, and he's getting a lot of carries, fine. But you just got to look at the team also, right? You want a team, you got to be on a team that scores. So until Chicago proves they're a team that scores, there's only so much you're going to get out of anybody. So they have to rebuild their offensive line and do a lot as a team before I'm feeling comfortable with any Chicago Bear.
Yeah, what would have helped his numbers too is if the defense got a lot of turnovers and put him in the red zone almost immediately. Without the turnover aspect, it doesn't help your running back game and doesn't have the stats look as good unless he breaks a run or two each week for like 20, 30 yards a lot.
Yeah, agreed. So let's keep going with the countdown here. Number 17, Melvin Gordon from the Broncos. We had him at 33rd overall. So still finished with 918 yards, splitting carries there. So your guys' thoughts on Gordon?
His stats, I mean, for a guy splitting carries, his stats actually looked pretty good. But you also got to think they didn't really have a quarterback all year long to throw the ball. So the running back game stats for both running backs for Denver are definitely going to be pretty close and similar for the fact that they both played pretty much the same amount of carries each game. So for a guy that split, like I said, though, that split carries to have 10 touchdowns and over 1,100 yards total, it's actually a pretty good year, I would think, because, I mean, you're averaging 100 yards almost a game overall.
Yeah, Jeremy, thoughts?
Yeah, 1,100 yards, 10 touchdowns. If especially if you get the points per reception, not an awful guy, a guy that like he could definitely be on a starting team, could have helped you out, gave you some points. I wouldn't. Again, this is the guy for next year I'd be worried about because I think the rookie he shared time with, Javonte, is going to probably get a higher percentage of the carries. And I think that Gordon's role will be reduced.
Yeah, is Melvin Gordon a free agent or is it his last year of his contract there in Denver, though?
I was going to bring that up. I believe he is on the free agent list.
So we have to watch what even happens to him. I could see him going to the Jets as a backup running back.
Yeah, it could.
I see him honestly falling in, and I think he'd be a good fit with New Orleans if Kamara is out. I feel like he'd be a really good fit there, unless he enjoys the not being a backup role, but being a split carry role in Denver. Then he does stay in Denver. But I think most people aren't going to want to say I'm going to want to split carries. So I think he'd rather have a starting job.
Yeah, agreed. So it'll be interesting to see where that happens. NFL free agency is coming up here in a couple weeks, so it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But speaking of splitting carries, his teammate from the Broncos was number 16, Javonte Williams, also over 900 yards receiving, 300 receiving, 7 total touchdowns. We had him projected 32nd overall heading into the year, and he finished 16th. So definitely a good rookie campaign. Your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, we just talked about his other running back. He had a really good rookie year. You can't go wrong with the year and the stats that he had. Almost over 1,200 yards for a rookie is really good. His touchdowns were down, but his numbers were up for receptions compared to Gordon. So I think for a guy that just came into the league as a rookie at North Carolina, I think that he'll have a really good second year, and he'll build on that and probably even have a better year this year and probably be close to the top 10, honestly.
Yeah, Jeremy, any thoughts on Williams?
100% agreed. He's, there's a little bit of risk, obviously, when you're counting on someone taking that next step. But I think it's going to happen. Like my gut tells me definitely 100% he'll be closer to the top 10, more of a top 10-ish guy. He looked really good as a rookie, and rookies tend to get much better in their second year. And he did better as a receiver than people thought he would do, a lot better. So I could see him being a full 3 down back, moving into his second year, and possibly no real ceiling. I mean, he might be one of the stars of the league in a few, within the next few years. So this is an interesting guy to draft and pick up because it could really end up being one of those special picks that make the difference for your team.
Yeah, he honestly, for being a rookie, he reminds me a lot of CMC in Carolina and Austin Eckler in LA, where they use him equally as a running back as they do as a receiver out of the backfield. So I do like that aspect for a running back. When you think about it, 43 receptions, you probably think he probably had almost 70, 80 targets, if not more. So you think about it, he had a pretty good year for that. So that's a lot of points per reception for if you have a PPR league.
Yeah, agreed. Moving on to number 15 here. The first disappointing player on the list is Dalvin Cook from the Minnesota Vikings. We had him projected at 2, finished 15th. So it's still definitely worth fantasy starts, but had him projected at 309 points. Only scored 208 fantasy points. Sean, thoughts on Cook there in Minnesota?
Yeah, for a guy that just got the big contract he wanted after his rookie contract, it was a really disappointing year. But he did also have an ankle injury, so that held him out for 4 games. But for a guy that had almost 1,200 yards rushing in only 250 attempts and had 6 touchdowns, it's pretty good stats.
Mm-hmm.
You probably could add almost 5-6 touchdowns on that he had throughout the year that were called back because of a flag on the offensive line with holding. But he had a decent year, not as many receptions as normal. Obviously with Justin Jefferson and Alexander Madison out of the backfield as well that he shared time with, they got a lot more of the receptions than he normally would. But for Cook's numbers, I think the rushing yards wasn't as bad. It's just he didn't have as many touchdowns to help his numbers out for the year.
Yeah, we had him projected at 14 touchdowns. He scored 6 on the year. Jeremy, your thoughts on Cook?
Hey, you gotta like that 4.7 average. It shows that he's still got it. What makes him special, right? It was just like Sean was saying. There was other factors. I like him as a bounce back guy. I think those projections from 21 might be what he does this next coming year. That's what I would look for. Like I don't think he's a guy on the way down. I think the average yards per carry show that. He's still got the talent. He's still a very capable running back. So I think the 311 attempts, 1456, 12 touchdowns is very realistic for and the receptions is very realistic for the next year coming.
My only criticism for the upcoming year for him for being in fantasy leagues is what kind of offense does Minnesota come into the year with?
Mm-hmm.
That's my only thing. With the new head coach, we're not really sure what kind of offense we're going to have. That's the only thing that's with what I see is the only problem. I mean, he's probably still going to get his amount of attempts and everything rushing wise, but is it going to be more of a passing offense, kind of like LA had with the Rams, or is there going to be more rushing of attempts? So that's going to be the question that I want to see.
Yeah, agreed. So it'll be interesting. Yeah, I do expect him to have a bounce back year. Let's see, number 14, we have dAndre Swift from the Detroit Lions. We had him projected at 16th overall. Points almost the same, projected 217, scored just under 211. We had him projected at 828, but ended up with 617. But Sean, what do you think of Swift there with Detroit?
I like him a lot. I think he has a good future with Detroit. Up until this year, they didn't have 100-yard rushers in games for I think it was like 3 or 4 seasons, and I think Swift had 2 or 3 games where he had 100 yards this year. So he's definitely a good running back. For Detroit fans, Swift reminds them a lot of when Barry Sanders came into the league. He's a hard rusher. If you think about 151 attempts for 617 yards, imagine him if he had 200 attempts or 250. And with the amount of receptions he had, he could have had almost 1,500 total yards this year overall. For fantasy aspect, he's a great running back. He doesn't score as many touchdowns in Detroit, obviously, but the yards that he gets because of them usually not scoring touchdowns and either going for it or kicking field goals is really good. But the only thing that is a downside to him is the touchdowns. We predicted 9, he ended with 7. So you think about it, it's not as good as what you want, but he still does the numbers to finish number 14 and finish without playing, I think, 3 or 4 games this year.
Yeah, right. He did miss 4 games, and you mentioned 2. He had 2 games over 100 yards. One was 130, the other one was 136. So then the next game in week 12, he got injured. Came back at the end of the year, but only had 11 carries combined in the last 2 games. But Jeremy, thoughts on Swift in Detroit?
I think he has a lot of good upside.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here's a guy who I don't think you're going to be with all the holes that they have to fill. The one thing you don't have to worry about Detroit doing is they're gonna try to upgrade running back, be focused on a running back this offseason. They're not. So there's every opportunity is pointing for Swift to improve and grow on these numbers. So I don't know that he's going to be elite or anything like that, but he'll probably move up from 14 and maybe even creep into like the top 10 area, depending on if he continues to grow his receiving game. That's where there's a lot of opportunity. If he continues to stay a target for Goff, it's going to be good for him. So I don't know. I would look at him as kind of like if I was ranking running backs right now, I'd probably move him up to like somewhere between 10 and 12, maybe like 11. So move him up slightly, expect slightly better numbers with a good upside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like how you said that Detroit's not going to draft a running back. I think they have like 6 running backs on their team that have been in the league for 3 years or less. So they have a lot of backups for Swift that can definitely come into the games. And if he's out, change the pace up, or even different for third down running backs or games that he is obviously either not playing or something. They have players that they could put in.
But let's get back to our countdown here. Coming in at number 13, we have Damian Harris from the New England Patriots. We had him projected 27th. He ended up 13th overall. Had him projected at 7 touchdowns. He scored 15 on the year. So that's what helped boost his ranking. But your guys' thoughts on Harris in New England?
I'm actually shocked by this a lot. I didn't expect it for a Bill Belichick running back core to have a guy in the top 13 in fantasy numbers for the year, or even say top 15. Especially with the rookie running back they got with Stevenson. Harris was out for, I think, 2 or 3 games. So, and when I know Stevenson had a bunch of big games where he was running the ball really well as well, that his numbers made Harris's look small. So, but for a guy that plays under Bill Belichick and with running backs that he does running back by committee to finish 13th is honestly a pretty good year. His numbers to our predictions were almost similar with the rushing yards and the receiving yards and the averages. It's just that he blew it apart with how many touchdowns he got inside the red zone.
Yeah, exactly. Jeremy, thoughts on Harris there in New England?
Yeah, man, it's just a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah.
That's a little bit scary because, new offensive coordinator, I think, and Mac Jones is going to be in his second year. So you have to imagine that things are going to change a little bit. Their approach, they're going to try to open him up a little bit more. So, but the average per carry is good. It's just that they have been traditionally a very run by committee type team. When's the last time that New England's had a breakout year to year number one running back that you can count on, So, I expect him to be about the same. He might even regress and take a little step backwards because it's hard to imagine another 15 touchdown season.
Yeah, I agree on that one for sure.
Yeah, yep, agreed as well. Coming up to number 12, we have Nick Chubb from the Cleveland Browns. We had him projected 13th. He finished 12th. Yards almost exactly where we had him. Touchdowns a little off, a couple off, but guys, thoughts on Chubb in Cleveland?
If you're looking for just a running back and not a receiving running back, Chubb's a really good back for that aspect. With only 20 receptions on the year, that's really low for a running back. They usually will put Kareem Hunt in for that aspect and get him out of the backfield to catch the ball. But for running back yard wise, for almost 1,250 and 8 touchdowns on the game on the ground, and I think he missed like 2 games this year with an injury, that he definitely made the stats look really well for a 5.5 average for a guy that runs up the middle a lot and usually doesn't get outside.
Yeah, Jeremy, thoughts on Chubb?
Yeah, my thoughts on Chubb kind of go with the thoughts for the team. What's which direction is Cleveland going to go? Are they going to bounce back, or are they going to continue to fall? It's really what kind of offseason they have, and I say that because if they go in the right direction, let's say, and turn it around, and put their problems behind them and go get it back on track, that's really good for Chubb. That means more touchdowns. It means a better passing game opens up his running game more. Look at the average per carry. He's a really good running back.
Mm-hmm.
The only, the fear is what's going on in Cleveland because they were really rocky for a while there. But I think he could break the top 10 if Cleveland goes the right direction and gets back to being a playoff team and plays well. The risk is that franchise going to turn it back around and get their feet under the ground, back onto the ground and going in the right direction? So I think the risk there is more the team than it is Nick Chubb.
Yeah, that's for sure. What the Browns do in its offseason is definitely a big decision on what people want to do fantasy-wise with Nick Chubb, especially if Landry doesn't stay around, or Kareem Hunt and Baker, then who do you have handing the ball off, and who do you have possibly throwing the ball to at Chubb as well?
In 11, we have Josh Jacobs from the Raiders.
He had a good year. I know he missed, I think it was like 2 weeks in week 2 and 3 this year. He had a really good year for a Vegas team that he didn't have any other running back to take over him when he wasn't in the game. Kenyon Drake got injured throughout the year. So he averaged the same amount of touchdowns we predicted, 9 rushing touchdowns. He went up and above and beyond for receptions, which then we predicted, which is pretty good for a running back. That definitely helps his numbers when you have 54 receptions for almost 350 yards. But I just don't – it's hard to say what kind of numbers that Vegas and the Raiders could have with him going forward. I think he's going to – obviously, he'll probably average at pretty much what he averaged this year, around 800 to 300 yards receiving-wise then, just because they have so many players in the back or in the field there for them to throw to with Carr that I just don't think that they're going to hand the ball off as much, especially with the division they play in. It's hard to run in when you have Denver and Kansas City's rush defense and the Chargers for them to get in those 6 games. So it's hard for you have to almost throw the ball more than what they expect. So I think if his receptions and receiving yards can go up and touchdowns from that point, then I think it's worth it. But depending on his rushing, I don't think he'll get more than 8 to 1,000 yards each year.
Jeremy, thoughts on Jacobs?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's solid for what you're seeing in front of you right now. Those numbers, you can count on that amount of points, right? So in the right spot in the draft, in your fantasy draft, sure, if that's what you need, as your backup, whatever, your second running back or whatever it is, depending on how your league is. But there's no upside here. There's no excitement. There's no always, like you're not looking at it and thinking, oh, this guy can get you 50% more than this and take a big jump up, like when we were talking about Javonte Williams from Denver kind of thing. Like there's no jump here. So, this is what he's going to be. You don't expect more kind of thing. So to me, I'm not that type of guy. Like, right. I'm looking for guys with upside, that guys who could surprise, which is a good and a bad thing because sometimes, people have a lot of success in the right spot, taking a guy like this because because they have a constructed plan. And this guy is going to fit that plan. He's pretty sturdy, not injury prone. I mean, you could pretty much safely get this amount of points from him next year if you take him.
Yeah, he's definitely not an RB1. He's definitely a 2 to a flex. Unless you run deep running backs in your league. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't consider him a main starter. He's definitely a low running back 2 option and to a flex option, definitely. And nowadays with receivers, it's hard to even put a running back in a flex spot.
Yeah, agreed.